Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. It is Friday, and we are finally back for a Khyber Shards Answers. We've been all sorts of discombobulated,
That we
uh,
have.
but we are back to discuss our most recent episode, The Manxome Foe,
Boy.
and the showdown with the Queen of Thorns. And as you can see, we have Colin.
'Tis I.
'Tis you.
More importantly, we have Philip, who created this world that we wreaked havoc in.
So, now that this episode obviously brings the core of the Feywild conflict to its conclusion, and we have some denouement, as it were, in the next one. Having gone through an entire Feywild adventure, how you doing?
It is taxing, man. We were talking about this off camera about how I'm always wonderfully exhausted after these because you get to just let your imagination go. And so there are no rules of a reality to ground any of these experiences to. Every time we've walked through a portal, I have not known what the rules are. There's no telling what you're going to walk out into. And you did a great job of keeping that kind of tension on a story level with Thistle going, I think so. I'm pretty sure this goes there. So it is pleasantly tiring. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. I'm sad at the prospect of having to leave it because it's been so enjoyable. We have other people we need to get back to in this story, including other players, but it's been wonderful. I'm very excited for people to get to see the way we conclude our time here.
I am too. I think mostly after this episode, people are less violently angry at me.
I don't think so. They'll forgive, but I think it'll stay.
In comments, Emily did lower the knife. She was pointing at me.
That's literally what she said too.
So it's a little better at the very least. It's a little better. So this was an interesting combat to design because
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, it was a combat where you guys did not want to hurt the opposition.
Right. And we didn't, going into the room, know exactly who was opposition. With trying to free the Laughing Lord, the picture was painted that he was very much held a hostage. Mm-hmm. And so that's why the idea of, well, we should free this hostage, even if he had bad intentions. Surely he has seen the error in his ways and will be reformed. And instead, he decided he was a jerk no matter what.
He was trying to help.
See, and that's part of the rules I don't know going in, which is wonderful to not know. After the session, Philip described it as Fey or Fey. Mm-hmm. He's doing what he does. And I was like, oh, that absolute drive is so foreign, that no lesson learned. But I loved encountering. I also loved decapitating.
Oh man, I was so glad you got to do it.
Yeah.
Like that you finally got to use the sword to its full potential. Because I know that it's probably a weapon. I don't know. I would guess that it's probably a weapon that Pog will sort of reserve for certain uses. Because Pog doesn't always want to murder the people that he's fighting.
Yeah.
And it's not really an option to roll a natural 20 with a Vorpal sword and say, but I want to do it to be non-lethal.
Yeah.
It's really
his head
not
just falls into a jar like
right.
It's Futurama starts talking.
Yeah, not so much. Since you are not the Green Knight.
Thankfully. I hope that's not an obligation I have now, that I have to go and take his place later.
Don't you
just. Let's talk about the encounter with River, because how did you determine whether or not we were going to get through that? Because you had to know that Casey and I as players were never going to hit River. Like, you weren't going to talk us into killing her.
Yeah. No, I figured it was very unlikely, even if I desired for you to kill River, that I could create a circumstance where you would do it without being just mustache twirlingly evil
Right.
in myself. Like I would have to get, I don't know, River to be killing the children at the school or something crazy like that, and that just, you know, wouldn't have made any sense in the story we were telling in any case.
Right.
Um, so I was trying to think of a way to do social combat, because
What a term.
there's lots of RPG systems that try to account for how do you decide when you've defeated someone, like in a debate, in an argument.
Mm,
Um, and it's not easy. I mean, D&D, the closest you get with D&D is that you turn it into a skill challenge, and you say, okay, well, you need this many successes, or whichever side of a debate gets to this many successes first, wins. um, but that's essentially saying I get to determine exactly how many rounds this combat will last at a minimum. Um, and because combat in D&D tends to take a little bit of time, setting the requirement high uh, is tricky because you guys can't really endure being attacked for a lot of rounds.
right. No, she was messing me up.
Yeah. Um, and so that seemed like a non-starter because D&D doesn't really have a degrees of success system where I can say, and I could create something like that. But so what I ended up doing, and I didn't find, this is got to be, I can't be the first person who has come up with this as an idea for solving social combat. I didn't happen to come across it, but this feels like an obvious, or simple at least, solution. I just gave her an extra track of hit points. I gave her a different set of hit points next to her regular hit points so that I could track actual hit points in the event that combat became violent. Um, and instead, I gave her a secondary track of hit points, which I didn't come up with a clever name for what to call these, but just the hit points of her resistance to
Right.
your efforts, essentially. Um, some RPG systems have a secondary wound track for like strain or something like that, and you could probably create something like that in a system like that would a different track that would count for this. But since D&D doesn't, I just made it up. And I tried to think of different ways to affect damage because that became the next thing, is how do you damage that track, because
Right.
there's nothing of like, well, when you succeed on a persuasion check you roll a d8, like that's not a thing. So I just decided that whatever number you rolled on the dice, that was how much you wore down her resistance.
Mm,
So I liked that in the end because it meant that even bad rolls, and given Shade and Pog, that
true.
seemed
Yep.
likely, that
Fair.
even bad rolls would still have an effect.
Right.
I set the track at 65,
Oh, okay.
which was, I think, about half of her hit point total. um because, and I set it lower because you're not getting multi attacks. You and Shade both get 2 attacks in a round, and so your damage potential to a hit point track, in
Right.
addition to things like spells and extra effects on your weapons and things, is much greater than even a really good roll for you guys on a persuasion or deception or whatever, or some kind of charisma check. So I set it at 65, and we went for, I think, 4 rounds, because Pog wasn't making the checks initially.
Right.
So it was Shade and then on. And it was she was at Shade had worked her down, done 54 damage to her resistance, and then Pog rolled really crazy on his
Yep.
persuasion check and put it way over the top. So that was kind of how I designed it. I liked that as a design. I think it's pretty good. You could probably find ways to add little fiddly bits to it, like making a creature, if you wanted to give nuance to it, you could make a creature resistant to certain kinds of checks. So like I could have made the Queen of Thorns resistant to intimidation. You don't scare
Right.
her.
Right.
So if you try intimidation, it only deals half the number you roll. Like you could do that. If you were in a really social heavy thing, like a political intrigue game, like obviously the Stormreach storyline right now is kind of political intrigue. If you wanted to create a political intrigue challenge like this, then you could decide what are the kinds of arguments that would be more potent or less potent. So you could add a lot of nuance to it. I had never done this before, and so I didn't want to add a lot of nuance to it because adding lots of parts all at once means you don't know which parts work and which part don't. So
Right.
I just tried it really basic, and I felt like it worked pretty well. I debated whether to tell you guys how it worked ahead of time, and I decided not to. I don't
I'm
know if
so
that
glad
was
you
the right.
didn't. I'm
Yeah.
so
Okay.
glad you didn't, because from a narrative standpoint, it gave you so much agency and power in that, for the same way that, we ask questions as players like, well, how is he looking at this
Mm,
point in the combat? And you get to describe the physical state. You getting to describe moments of that very first thing Shade said while I was entangled, it was just a quick, not a dropping, but a weakening of the hold,
hmm
and then a resilient return. Was, oh, this is getting through. Eyes darting to the side, these little moments of like the humanity cracking through and that will kind of breaking was really fascinating. And if you went down, like you're saying, the political route, it would give an opportunity for maybe things to be debuffed, in a sense of, oh, you said that thing that your opponent is really, really tuned in on.
hmm
This didn't make an impact. This strengthened his resolve, kind of thing. So
Right.
it really was a great conclusion to how much I have just praised your painting of these scenes. It was great that we really got to experience a story being effective and the
hmm
person being affected by it. I thought it was a really powerful choice, and that, what a creative way to do things. I am so glad you didn't tell us, because there was a wonderful sense of figuring it out as we went
mm
along, and that moment when Pog goes, keep talking, she's in there,
hmm
was so the moment that it felt like you were looking for, and it was so organic. I had so much fun with that.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad it worked, and that it came across. And I'm glad that it worked. You know, in a normalish amount of encounter time. Like I was kind of worried,
Right.
what if it's over too fast? What if it takes, too long? That sort of thing. And so feeling like it was felt like you guys were still in danger, but it was accomplishable, is usually what I'm after in an encounter. And so that worked.
So if we hadn't decapitated the Laughing Lord, was the plan for his side of the story to be returning hit points into that willpower, or?
Yeah. So I was entirely unprepared for you guys to free the Laughing Lord.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that never occurred to me. And so I hadn't spent any thought on like what he would do if he was free to do what he wanted. I thought that there would be some interacting with the Laughing Lord where he's trying to get you to let him loose. And so I was prepared for like how would he try to like bargain his way out of this situation. But when you just first move loosed him, I was trying to think what would he do, and so I thought, okay, he's going to resume what he was trying to do, and it would be telling a story because he's kind of a bard character, and so I had him launch into that, which if I had thought of it ahead of time, I'd have absolutely like written down the story he was going to try and tell instead of trying to improvise it on the spot. And I had him rolling and also doing damage. And I decided that I would also have him essentially doing damage parallel to yours, and whoever wore her resistance
Mm.
down first would win, rather than having him return resistance. That would have also probably made sense as a way to do it. But I liked there being an element of a race to it. Um, but man, I would not have been prepared for him to win that race.
You know
I
what's so funny is it's always a double-edged sword every time you tell me that we surprised you, because on the one hand I go, hey, I was creative in a way that Philip wasn't ready for. And then it goes, hey, you're nowhere near creative enough for Philip not to be able to handle it. Because it just seemed you responded to it like that had been what you knew I would do.
well, it's a little easier with non-arch fae
Mm,
because they are not deeply nuanced. They're complicated, but their motives are clear and straightforward and right in it, usually right in their name. And so I knew what the Laughing Lord wanted. I knew that he definitely wasn't the kind of creature whose story would involve him like being chastised and learning a lesson from it. And so, of course, he's going to resume trying to do it and paint that as helping you. Because
mm.
also, he doesn't know why you're here.
I guess that
Uh,
is fair. I hadn't considered his
and
perspective of.
so you've just shown up and you appear to be fighting the Queen of Thorns. So if you'll keep her busy, then he will get control of this situation. And I suppose if he had won the race, if you guys had just rolled really horribly, it would have needed to be somehow he transforms into the King of Thorns, which was his goal in capturing River. And I would have had to improvise what happens to River and what you guys could do about it. And that would have been an interesting challenge. But
See, but I'm
happily,
not
it didn't
daring
happen.
enough to lose in order to challenge your creative muscle.
Right. Well, good. So yes, I'm very happy with the way that the Feywild adventure went. I like the concluding episode that we haven't released yet. I think it ends on a nice note. I will not
Same.
describe the note in any
Same.
way because I want to let people decide whether to be mad at me on their own later on. Anyway, though, we do have a handful of questions
Cool.
for you. First is from Mia.
Hi,
And
Mia.
this was asked before the episode that we didn't record last week or 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago? Oh my goodness.
We've been playing for a while.
Yeah, we have. From Mia. And it says, sorry, how does it feel to take more of a role in leading where the party goes? I know you share that role with Casey, of course, but you're definitely making more decisions than when you were a full party. Thoughts?
Good question, and honestly, one that we discussed. It's challenging. When there's only two players, it feels like there's a need for more conversation than is necessarily natural. Especially two humans that just enjoy each other's company, as that Casey and I do. There was no desire from me to feel like I was leading anything, and it's not in Pog's nature to boss someone around. Much the same for Casey and for Shade. So I think it was a really fun duo to have both kind of recognize we need to do things and put the urgency behind trusting whoever's idea seemed more solid. I'm excited to see how this changes the approach that both of our characters have to plan making and to going forward into action back in Stormreach, because we've both had an experience as characters where we've made statements and felt supported and gone forward with those. As a player, it's nerve-wracking, I'll be honest. It's something that you think about a lot, making sure that your player partners don't feel railroaded, and making sure that there is room for someone to say something that they think needs said or that they just want said, whether that's in character or out. So I'm grateful that we did this after we've been playing together for a while. And I think there's a unique kind of trust that comes with gaming with someone as a partner in
Mhm.
whatever form. Um, we all have in our group so stories of answering each other's call outs in video games and it working so well because we've been talking in them for thousands of hours. And very much the same thing has begun to develop playing this game with Eric and Casey, in that we can kind of see where the other person's heading and decide how to best follow them. But it's definitely been an exercise in awareness, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed it.
Very good. And it has been fun to watch Shade and Pog's dynamic in this story. I was very interested to see it, and it's fun. It's neat. It's a neat, different kind of party. And yeah, I'm very interested to see how that plays out when we get back to the trio. Our next question comes from Emily. Colin,
Yes.
would you rather keep the Vorpal sword or get Fury's Edge back?
Keep the Vorpal sword is going to be my answer. Yeah. Um, I think we've discussed this in a KSA that there was always a sense with Fury's Edge that it wasn't ever really his.
Hmm.
Always being told I'm going to get that back from you, or you're the one that stole that from Kolos, and that's you have Kolos's axe. It was never Pog's.
Mhm.
And yeah, he may have earned it, but it's not like he was known for it. It's not like it was known for him. And assuming that the Vorpal sword comes back with us, he will be the only one in our plane to have held it. And much the same with the axe that Solarka has made. These are potentially the weapons that the story of Pog will have included in them. And especially now that Pog has made that connection about feeling what it's like to be on the side of the light. These are the tools that he, in a perfect world, would be taking with him on that. And so, yeah, Fury's Edge was always someone else's. And there was a long debate in my mind as a player as to whether or not I was just going to give that axe back to Kolos because it was his, and it never felt like mine. So that's a good question, but that's the answer there.
Cool. Laura would like to know, what would Pip's favorite part of this adventure be?
Okay, so the disappointing answer would be the Forest Queen's Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as a former street rat, even though he has now been at the mansion long enough to know that he's going to be fed, there would be something incredible about a room of revelry and feasting, where everyone who was decent seems to have been made welcome. And especially if he'd have been along to hear the story be listened to from his heroes, it would be there. If not that, it would have definitely been the fight with the Jabberwock, because there was a lot to that. That's the kind of fight that had multiple environments in it. It covered different terrains. We fought that thing over space. That was a big fight. And that would have had Pip enraptured for the next decade, deepen his own involvement in the fight until he had soloed it in his retelling of the story.
Right.
I think that would be it.
Not the tree full of decapitated heads?
No.
Okay.
That would have been a thing that definitely left an impact. But I feel like Pip would only have happened upon one of two reactions. He would have either ran back through the portal screaming, or he would have been frozen in utter terror and missed everything that happened with the Green Knight. Yeah. And he would have hated watching Pog get decapitated. Yeah. Oh man, that would have been traumatic for him. Yes, especially when you described like the slow seeping blood after
Mhm.
the impact, like, yeah, he would. What kind of therapy do we have on site for these kids? Because they've already been through some stuff. And now that I'm thinking about what our heroes go through, they've got a long, traumatic road ahead of them.
I don't think we have anyone trained on site. I think the watch party is voting for Mrs. Bright Doom as school counselor.
I like her
Uh,
too much to put her through this.
right.
Can we hire an outside source that we're not attached to?
Man, there would have to be some sort of like specialty in counseling with an emphasis on extraplanar encounters or something like that. Like there'd have to be some sort of very specialized degree that helps counsel people who have had weird encounters with with other planes.
We're all
Um,
gonna need to meet that person at the end of this, because
well,
I
I
don't.
mean, the horrifying truth is that the Feywild is a more comprehensible plane than most of them.
That's horrifying.
Because there's a plane that's just chaos. It's just the churning chaos. There's no order to it at all. And
No, thank you.
there's a dream plane, and there's a plane that is just anti-life. And like there's all sorts of planes that are so conceptual that there's just how does the mind even deal with them? This at least has narrative.
That I worry for the people that hear about this story from Pog and Shade, because they're not likely to tell it in a very cohesive, comprehensive way,
Right.
or with very much hand holding. Like, Solark is going to hear some dark stuff told wrong.
Oh boy. Yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens when we return to Stormreach. But in the meantime, that is all of our questions for this
Cool.
week. If you'd like to submit questions for KSA, you can do so on our Discord, where you will find a link in the description down below. Words. Uh, Down below, you'll also find links to all of our other social media and Colin's Twitch, where he is sorry BTR. The O is a 0. And of course, we'd love to hear from you in comments on what your favorite part of this
Please.
Feywild adventure was so far. But in the meantime, new episodes of Khyber Shards come out on Monday. New Khyber Shards answers on Friday. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.